Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Leadership Launchpad's Pick and Mix podcast. And today we're joined by the great Paul Ainsworth, who will introduce himself in a moment. Multiple hats, both in sort of schools and as kind of an author and all kinds of stuff. Delighted to have him on today. Big fan, love the books. Definitely challenging to me, and we'll maybe get into this later, because I am seduced by silver bullets, as in I have looked for them before, like most leaders, I'm sure. And so that was, a real kind of, an ignition point for me, really, reading the book. So anyway, let's get stuck into it. So Paul, tell us a bit about what your current role is.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for kind of inviting me on Launchpads. I think we met a few years ago for the CPD network, didn't we? That you, Tracy and Sam run, which has just been a brilliant innovation.
Yeah.
I'm the Education Director for Infinity Academies Trust. It's a multi-academy trust of 13 primary schools based in Lincolnshire, and will be 16 in September. Maybe 20 by Christmas, so kind of rapidly growing. I've been with the trust, since its second formation. It started off as a mini-mat of 2 schools in about 2015, and then in 2019 it took on 4 and 5 schools, and that's when I've been with the organisation since then. I've been writing for 25 years now. Across different journals. Before the days of blogs, I was writing for hard copy magazines, whether that was SecEd or Head Teacher Update or things like that. And then in, I think, 2010, I wrote my first book. And I love writing. To me, it's a great opportunity for reflection. It's a great opportunity for mindfulness. In some ways, it's that way of in an ideal world, what would you do? That to me is what a book's about. So, and my latest 2 books are the No Silver Bullets books, Day in, Day Out School Improvement and The Heart and Soul of School Improvement. I met a CEO that I hadn't met before about 12 months ago, and he said to his other members of his exec team, he said, "Oh, this is Paul, the No Silver Bullets guy."
Oh, right.
So that's kind of seems to become almost my nickname at the moment, which I'm quite happy with, and I'm sure we'll kind of discuss.
John Wayne of education. You have to start wearing like a cowboy belt with some guns and stuff in it. Probably. And so the background is in English, is it? Is it secondary or primary?
No, actually, the background's maths.
Is it?
I'm the really unusual person. So when I chose my A-levels, I chose A-levels on the basis of subjects that I wrote the least in. I went through secondary school believing that I couldn't write. Just didn't, had no confidence in putting words on the page. And I started writing by writing some book reviews for a little newsletter, and the lady, Jane West, who edited the magazine at the time, said, "Oh, would you write me an article?" And I went, "You don't want me to write an article. I'm a maths person. I can't string words together." And I wrote an article, and she said, "I like that. Can you write another one?" And hence writing's continued. Originally a secondary background, so that makes me, again, peculiar for a second reason. Kind of worked up to head of secondary school, and then joined Multi-Academy Trust and started working in primary schools, initially secondary and primary, and then now it's primary only. So I've kind of done both, which I think is absolutely fascinating and
super helpful.
And I would say to anybody, if you're a primary specialist, spend some time in secondary school. If you're a secondary specialist, spend some time in primary schools and see what you can learn and magpie from the other side of the fence.
Yeah, brilliant. I mean, one of the things that already, before we even got into the content, I think is a takeaway for people listening to this, leaders and stuff, is that we shouldn't constrain ourselves, should we, to a kind of preconceived, limitations. I was similar to you, that I went through the whole of school believing that my only strength was sport. That was the only thing I was good at. And that was where my validation and self-esteem and all that came from. And so I shied away from anything academic at all because of a lack of confidence. But it's almost like you can't gain any confidence until you start doing the thing that you don't want to do. And it sounds like you've had a similar thing, in that you only need one person to tell you you're suddenly okay at it, and that opens the door. Is that what happened to you?
Yeah, so, Jane, who's the editor of Gifted and Talented Update, head of English that I used to work with as well, would would read my stuff, and kind of, so at least I knew it had gone through their lens before I passed it on. And it was those two colleagues, I suppose. And in at that time, if we're going back to say 2005, 2006, the world of education writing was quite
Yeah.
small. There weren't that many people who wrote. So once you wrote for one thing, you'd find other editors would email you and say, "Could you write something for me?" And
Right.
it
Yeah.
kind of
That's
went
interesting.
a little bit like that. I was just really lucky. I probably wouldn't be able to write like that now. I didn't have
No.
well, social media didn't exist. I
No.
got my Twitter account in 2010,
Yeah.
and I didn't do Facebook or any of that kind of thing. So it was very much on, your writing was based on actually your ideas, whereas there's a
Right.
little bit more now around where your coverage is. I can remember Teacher Toolkit didn't exist when I started writing, and I remember Ross kind of emailing me once saying, "I really enjoyed your article," and that was before he was Teacher Toolkit. So that's
Really.
kind of, this is how far back we're going now.
Yeah. 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 That's so great. And I mean, again, just to pause for a second on that before we get into it, I think I had a conversation with someone recently who wanted to get into writing, blogs, whatever it was, but was scared. And, I talked through my journey, and probably similar to you, that you just got to give it a go. And then the funniest thing for me, someone gave me some advice when I was while I was holding back from writing blogs because I didn't know what people would think. They said, "You don't think anyone's reading it, do you?" Like, don't get carried away. Like, the whole world's not reading it, but also, you got to go into these things knowing that what you do initially isn't going to be perfect, and just got to get started. Anyway, let's get cracking because I know that time is precious for you. So we're going to go into your first kind of fast friends question. And if you're new to the podcast, these are a set of questions that Paul was selected from, which the aim is to build connection between people so they get increasingly kind of more vulnerable. And it just gives us a chance to sort of, see the leader behind the leadership. So the first question you chose was, given the choice of anyone, dead or alive, who would you want as a dinner guest? Tell us about that.
So I love this question, and it was one that I was doing some training with a group of executive heads earlier on this term, and that was our kind of icebreaker. Who are
Right.
the people that you'd invite to dinner with? And I'm always throwing this one around.
Right.
So I've been through about 5 different people before I've reached
Okay.
where I've got to. So I started off when I looked at this and I thought, Tony Wilson. I'd love to talk to Tony Wilson. Tony Wilson was, I don't know, kind of music, TV personality of the 80s, 70s, up in Manchester. And one of his famous quotes is, "I'm not a genius, but I'm a genius at getting geniuses to work with me," which I just
Okay.
love. That's just brilliant, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I was thinking that, and then I went a little bit darker. Tony Wilson managed the band called Joy Division.
Okay.
Now, 11 days and 45 years ago, 18th of May 1980, Ian Curtis, who is the lead singer of Joy Division, lyricist and basically band leader, he took his own life,
Oh no.
kind of 18th of May 1980. So I'd love to talk to him.
Yeah.
I'd really like to talk to him. You just wish that something different could have happened, that he didn't feel in that position where he was, that he felt he had no other alternative. Would he realise that, 45 years later, 16, 17-year-olds are
Yeah.
still singing Love Will Tear Us Apart. They're
Incredible, isn't
still
it?
doing the bass line
Yeah.
for Atmosphere or those kind of things, that New Order would be where they are. New Order was the band that grew out of the ashes of Joy Division. And, Ian, you were going to go on tour to Manchester. You were going to go from Manchester on tour to America the next day. You had flight
Right.
tickets booked. For me, it is just a huge tragedy. And,
Yeah.
so I would love to talk to Ian Curtis. I don't know what he'd think of me. I think he'd think I was really boring. Just some middle-aged white guy with no hair, and he was trendy and cool and,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
edgy and all those things. But yeah, I'd love to kind of just have 10 minutes with him,
Yeah.
before the 18th of May 1980.
That's great, isn't it? And again, to draw some, I guess a leadership lesson from that is, whatever perspective we've got as a leader doesn't, is maybe not the truth. This idea of just getting one other person's opinion may shift that in, kind of fairly fundamental way that, Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah,
Okay, well,
so it's a bit dark, but it was just where my
no, no,
mind
no, no,
was
it's
when I put
great.
the question.
I think that, like you say, it's fascinating to think about that, and I'm sure we could think of all kinds of historical leaders who made decisions that if you could just get in front of that decision and chat to them about the consequences of that decision, they'd make a different one. Um, yeah, in a really side note that's just jumped into my head, my son, who's 11, is constantly trying to develop some sort of side hustle, to become a millionaire before he even goes to school. And one of his big ones was that he wanted to make a computer game where you would change a key element of history, and then that would change the game. So he was going, Hitler wins the war. Suddenly you change that, so and so and so. So yeah, that almost sort of sliding doors thing. That if you made one decision, how would it change? So, watch this space for the game. Anyway, let's keep going. So the next thing we're going to talk about is your first ignition point. And again, if you're new to the podcast, these are key events in the kind of guests' lives that have created some sort of transformation. And so your first one you chose it's called Challenging School. So tell us a bit about before the event and then afterwards.
Okay, so the first part of my career was reasonably straightforward, kind of worked my way up in secondary schools. Generally worked in what I would call nice schools. Apart from the first school I worked in, it was really challenging. But after that one, it was kind of nice, leafy lane schools. But I was always really interested in the idea of collaboration too. So first secondary schools I was a leader in, there was like a mini collaboration with two other secondary schools. We did joint CPD. I then did some research for the National College of School Leadership on collaborative leadership. And then the school I was head of was in a little partnership with two other schools, and we ran a joint curriculum at Key Stage 4. So kind of really interesting things about collaboration, but it never really worked. I've got to admit, it kind of never really worked. We always put our institution first. And then in January 2015, I started working in a group of challenging schools.
Okay.
And it was in a large multi-academy trust. And suddenly everybody was very vulnerable.
Right.
We were all really struggling. I was an education advisor, stroke regional director, stroke head of the teaching school. And there was a lot of pressure on us to kind of transform things. These are schools that have been broken for ages. These were kind of really challenging schools. And I know Sean Harris talks about, beware of the lens of my place is tougher than your place. And yes, there would be other schools that were equally tough or tougher. But for me, these were really tough schools. There were schools on the East Coast, high pupil premium, consistent, inadequate Ofsted judgments, over a period of time. Schools that had never been good. Never been good. Some of the schools in the more inner cities, high EAL as well, and a massive range of EAL as well. So it was just really fascinating to work in challenging schools, and I kind of skirted away from it. I kind of thought up till that point I didn't know if I could do it. I didn't know if I had the skills to do that. I didn't know if I had the resilience to do it, to be honest. And it was I found it just so invigorating. And it was the collaboration aspect as much as anything, that we were all trying to find solutions and sharing the solutions. And part of that ignition point was sitting in my first ever primary heads meeting within that multi-academy trust. 22 primary schools.
Wow.
And what I found really exciting was everybody was kind of saying, but I've done this. This happened. Have you tried it? Have you got a solution? Whereas I found a little bit in the secondary world, we kind of hidden our solutions a little bit and weren't quite as open. And we were only open when we were definitely sure about it. Whereas this was a group of colleagues going, we're in a mess. Our level 4 at this time is really low. Goodness knows what age-related expectation is going to be. What can we do? What can we do that's different? And I just found that really exciting. And I've took all, ever since that, I think working in challenging schools is a professional luxury almost. It is a privilege to work in challenging schools. There's so much you can do. I think it's really exciting, and you can transform things, and you can work in really interesting ways. You can try things that you wouldn't try in other schools. looking for those solutions from colleagues. What can we do that can work here? Everything else has been tried and it's not worked. What can we do that can really make a difference? So yeah, that was just massively different to me, to
Yeah.
go and work in a school in Grimsby near the docks, that with leaders that were young, inexperienced, and have the opportunity to mold them, and
Yeah.
to kind of show them show them the way that I thought you could lead schools in the right way. Working in Northampton in a kind of big inner city style comprehensive school, 1,500 pupils, inadequate judgment, special measures. What can we do with this one? Young head teacher as well. How can I give him confidence that he's doing the right thing? Keep
Mm.
chipping away day in, day out.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
just really exciting, I found.
Yeah, I love that. And there's something in there about um, a lot of times the growth is where the challenge is. That we if we find ourselves, and you don't want to create challenges, but there is definitely something about leaning into challenging situations and not hiding away from them, because often that's where the growth is. I've just literally finished reading, I think it's called The Obstacle is the Way, a guy called Ryan Holiday. And again, that sort of stoicism idea that, where the challenge is where the growth is, which sounds, what you've kind of experienced. Fascinating. Okay, well, let's jump into your first launchpad. So again, situation, I'll just share the screen so we can get a sense of the graphic for those that are watching it on a screen. And as normal, I'll explain what I was thinking when I created it, and then we'll ask Paul to sort of elaborate a bit on why it resonated with him, and that sort of stuff. So the launchpad that you've chosen is don't underestimate the power of environment. And for me, coming from a PD background, this kind of idea that, providing high quality PD is often just, one part of the equation, because we also need to think about the environment that surrounds that and whether it supports the transfer. I was really shocked when I started learning about the transfer of training and looking into the kind of the data. And I think some reports were talking like 80% of training never makes it back into the actual work environment. And so that's a challenge for all of us, isn't it? That if we're using kind of the completion of training as a proxy for success or a measure of success, we're probably kidding ourselves, because that doesn't guarantee that it will then translate into behaviour change and kind of, for us in education, sort of student outcomes. So then I tripped over this thing called like the behaviour equation, which again, I was like, wow, I'm 47. Why have I never heard of this before? And I think a lot of it comes from Kurt Lewin. He wrote, if you want to change behaviour, you need to change either the person or the environment. And so this equation of kind of our behaviour is a function of ourselves and our environment. I was like, oh yeah, and I'm not maths, PE. So I was a bit like, oh, an equation that I understand. Great. Sign me up. So when you unpick this a little bit, I started thinking about, okay, but what is it about the person? So if we're saying that their behavior or their performance, should we say, is a function of them, then maybe it's to do with their level of expertise. And I guess we could break that down into, knowledge, skills, and experience. Something about kind of their levels of motivation, and then something about their levels of kind of self-efficacy or confidence, I suppose we could call that, in other words. So those are the sort of personal things I was thinking about. And then when I started digging into the environment, they seem to split it into kind of physical surroundings, but then social surroundings. And so it goes into this idea that, is the practice that we're getting people to do, I mean, you could call it rehearsal maybe as well, closely matched to the performance space. So for us, we know now, don't we, that the more authentic we can make the practice, the more likely it's going to transfer. I don't know, practicing, your classroom positioning, not in your classroom, probably doesn't make a lot of sense. There was stuff around, are you providing staff with the resources they need? It's all very well saying, hey, this is a great idea, go do it. But if people are constrained by, the time or the equipment, then you've almost stop them from transferring it automatically. And then this idea that, I think this is more and more common now, and it's what I kind of hear from people that I lead, is this idea that there's just loads of other stuff going on, you know? So are we providing an environment which gives people a chance to focus on the thing we want them to get better at, or the thing they want to get better at? Or are we, again, bombarding them with other distractions? Or, certainly in a school setting, do we have a school culture and a classroom culture that allows people to practice and stuff? Anyway, so that was that. And then, of course, then he went into this idea of the social surroundings. I'm a big fan of kind of psychological safety, and this idea of, is it okay to not be okay in your organization? Is there a culture of people, feeling safe enough to say, I don't think I'm very good at this, or I don't think I'm very good. I've been trying it, but I'm still not sure whether I'm getting any better. Could you come and have a look? So that, supports things. Do they get high quality feedback, and do they have opportunities to kind of test stuff? So that was kind of what I was thinking when I looked at it. But why did it resonate with you, Paul?
I just think the kind of environment we work in is just so fascinating. So I've just written a little pamphlet for Head Teacher Update on executive headship. And I think it's one of those interesting things about, if you've been a successful head teacher, it doesn't mean you'll be a successful executive head teacher, because it's a different environment that you're going to work in. And I'm sure you see this with system leaders as well, Chris, that actually just because it's worked in one location, it doesn't mean it's going to work somewhere else. And how often do we see people do what I call lift and shift? Take something from one environment, it's worked really well for them, it's been a massive part of their success, and then they've taken it somewhere else and just misjudged the environment. They've maybe forgotten how long it took them the first time.
Yeah.
And they've kind of tried to shortcut that, and it's not worked. I kind of really obvious example of that is, kind of consistency around learning walls and classroom environments. Once you've done it in one school, it seems to be a quick thing to do, but you forget how long it takes to build up understanding, have a shared belief, have shared practices. And I've seen so many people take what seems really simple, let's have consistent learning environments, let's agree a waggle, let's children know where everything is, and then they get frustrated because it's not worked quickly.
Right.
But it's that environment. And I'm really fascinated that I've worked in 4 different multi-academy trusts, and I've tried to kind of evolve my practice each time. And one of the quotes that Sir David Carter kind of says is, you can only say a strategy is effective when you put it through the lens of a new location. So when I first kind of developed what I thought was a school improvement process, I then tried it in another setting. And it was trying it in another setting that gave me a belief that it could be effective. And then taking that into a 3rd and 4th setting, tweaking it each time, looking at the environment, looking at the ages and stages of leaders I was working with, looking at the ages and stages of the multi-academy trust, thinking of the vision and values of the CEO and the organisation as a whole, and subtly changing things all the time to fit all those parameters. So I think what you've kind of captured on that page, there are thousands and thousands of words in that infographic that you've kind of put there. And I would just say to anybody, move in school, move in classroom, move in year group, move in phase. It worked in your last area, it will work again, but take your time to understand the environment. Don't rush it. And lots of people get frustrated too quickly, especially earlier on in their career. Oh, I had really good classroom management there. Now I haven't. I'm a failure. I can't do it. No, it takes time. Give yourself time. And I don't think we do enough of that in education, about leaders actually saying to young members of staff and new people into our schools, it's going to take you a bit of time to settle in. I'm going to give you that time to do it. We're not in the world of Premiership football, where if you're not a 10 out of 10 on your first performance in centre and midfield, you're gone. We need to move away from that. So, I just think it's fascinating, Chris, and I think you've done a great job pulling it out there.
And something I haven't. This might be a future launchpad, but this idea that we almost have to anticipate a performance drop. that's just how it works, And yeah, I've got a new book coming out in July, called Confident Leaders by Design. It's all about self-efficacy, kind of the doctoral thing, and we talk about self-efficacy dips. That whenever you take on anything new, you should anticipate a dip in your confidence, but it's only a dip. And I think you've hit the nail on the head there around, we have to expect a dip in performance, but given enough time, we can get back up to and probably even exceed previous performance levels. Yeah, that's fascinating. I was thinking about other takeaways for people. I like that kind of the lift and shift, or drag and drop, and avoiding that, but almost thinking that you can lift and shift if you're prepared to tweak it, sort of thing. It can't be a passive or a lazy lift and shift. Interesting. Amazing. Okay, well, let's keep moving on. This is great. So the next thing that we're going to be talking about, I guess, is our next Fast Friends question. And this one is about your most treasured memory. So tell us about that.
So a number of your guests have chosen this one, and like all of us, we've kind of stayed away from getting married, or kind of birth of first child or second child, or any of those things. So the one that I'm going to go for is 18 months ago. So it's a personal one, but it kind of includes quite a lot of education. So if I look back, one of my proud moments was when I was 21, 22, playing in a cricket final with my brother, and we were opening the batting, and we kind of did quite well, and my dad was watching. And it kind of wasn't that long before he died. So that was kind of quite a treasured moment there. And then you kind of think, well, where are those in the future? So my treasured moment is 18 months ago, seeing my son's first band playing in a summer music festival, kind of up there, beautiful sunny day, plenty of beers flowing. They were doing a 2-hour set, and they pulled my daughter up to sing with them. So my son's now 22. My daughter's now 19. But to see the two of them on stage, my son is a bit of a character when he's on stage.
Okay.
I bought him, we're going back to Ian Curtis, I bought him the book about Joy Division when he was 14 that Peter Hook wrote. And basically it is a group of people with no talent get together and form a band. And they taught themselves. So my son read the book, and at the end of reading the book said, I want to form a band. And that's what he did. Power of practice. He just sat there with playing to post-punk songs, bass, day after day after day, day in, day out, until he got it. And to watch him then take that and play some of those classic songs from my youth, as well as his original material, and then to get my daughter up on stage as well, who's reasonably confident. So she's kind of singing, he's kind of playing bass. He's got two of his old school friends, who kind of Lewis and Reese, who I know really well, and they're just having a great time. They are just loving it. And there's another guy in the audience who I've never met before, similar age to me. He was under the influence slightly, but he could have been dancing as Liam and Noel. It could have been anybody up on stage. He was loving it like that. And to kind of watch as a dad, this audience, this mass of people singing, dancing, while your son and daughter are playing, that is a treasured moment.
Boom. I bet you were like taking eyes, snapping with your eyes, like remember this, remember this, remember this. That's really great. Yeah. I have a similar one, but sometimes when people are shouting about my son when he plays football, he's only 11, as I said, and they don't know that I'm his dad. So they're sort of, oh, what a great, God, that guy's good, isn't he? And I'm thinking, that's my son. Like, yeah, you do get those moments, don't you? Yeah, brilliant. Well, again, and I suppose the takeaway for leaders is to take those visual snapshots of where you are and to appreciate some of those kind of key moments.
And I would say as well, enjoy the good bits, the high bits. It's one of my stock pieces of advice to young head teachers is there's going to be some really tough days out there. There are going to be days when we don't know if we're doing the right thing or doing the right job, and it's really hard. But there are also days that are brilliant. enjoy the brilliant ones. Don't kind of rush them. Don't just go on to, oh, we've done that, move on next day. Kind of revel in that. And the way that I reveled in watching, my son and daughter playing and singing, just enjoy it. Be there, kind of immerse yourself in that. And just kind of, leaders, take your time, enjoy the good bits. Don't think, I've done that, move on, move on, move on.
Yeah,
No,
yeah, yeah,
if your SATs results in July are fab, if your GCSE results in August are where you want them to be, celebrate.
yeah,
Celebrate.
yeah,
There's
yeah.
going to be days when there aren't, but
Yeah,
celebrate those good days.
yeah, I love that. That's brilliant. All right, well, let's move on to your second ignition point. And we've kind of briefly talked about this before, but it'd be key to understand why it was an ignition point. And this is the writing of No Silver Bullets. So tell us a bit about what it was before and then, afterwards.
So No Silver Bullets came about I was in the big multi-academy trust and I was working with regional directors, and I sent them all an email and say, what are the top 10 pieces of advice you give the head teachers you're working with? Because I just want to capture them. I just want to capture them so that every head teacher that we work with sees these nuggets, butterflies, whatever you want to call them. So these were just a little day in, day out stuff that we did. I put it together as a pamphlet, kind of passed it up the chain, and it never really went anywhere. It didn't fit where the mat was at the time. So there is one copy of this pamphlet that my comms friend Ben put together for me, and I've still got it in a folder. And then a couple of years later, when it was in my third and fourth multi-academy trust, I thought, well, what happens if I unpack those ideas and gave them a narrative so that people understood how to do these little things? And then was then thinking, well, what are all the things I've learned since? So what was 55, 60 ideas became 95 ideas.
Yeah.
And like you, I put it out there. I published it. It was March the 1st at the end of the second 30 lockdown. So 2021. I didn't know how well it was going to do. I had no idea because we were all coming out of that lockdown and going back to school improvement and trying to think of, GCSEs weren't going to happen because they were school assessed grades or centre assessed grades. Key Stage 2 performance wasn't there. They were scrapped, but we knew we'd have to come back to it at some point. Ofsted was going to rear its ugly head soon, and, we were going to be back under the microscope. So I published it. And it was one of those moments of, I don't know what people are going to think about this. Are they going to look at it and think, this is old-fashioned? This is, he doesn't know what he's talking about. And it was that real sense of vulnerability of putting stuff out there. But the reception that I got from professionals has been amazing. And the amount of people that have emailed me, direct messaged me, grabbed me at the end of conference sessions and said, I read your book, it really spoke to me, or I read your book before at my first head teacher interview and then I aced my head teacher interview,
Nice.
or I bought your book at the start of my first head teacher year and I've just kept coming back to it in my senior leadership team. That has been like massive validation that your beliefs are maybe, they're kind of heading in the right direction, and there is value to what you're doing. And it has given me so many opportunities. This is one of them. Talking to you today, would I be talking to you on this podcast if I hadn't written No Silver Bullets? Would I last year have stood on the main stage at Pixel in front of 2,000 people being introduced by Rachel and have that opportunity? No, I wouldn't. And it has kind of made a huge change, not necessarily to my hierarchical career, in terms of promotion or those kind of things, but just the amount of amazing people that I've met, spoken to, chatted to, trained even. Yeah, so that it has been, and it's the power of the title as well. I wonder whether the title would have been, the No Silver Bullets thing has captured people's thoughts. And the subtitle, going back to Ian Curtis, Day In, Day Out is one of their songs. It's kind of off an EP. And that's where I stole that from, unashamedly, because also it means that whilst talking about school improvement, I can also talk about that band and what they achieved 45 years ago.
That was good.
And also the kind of men's mental health thing as well.
Yeah.
It kind of, so it has been
all linked together.
Yeah, kind of a real luxury, I think, to have those opportunities.
Yeah. again, there's so much stuff in there. I mean, one of the lessons, I suppose, the early ones in that story was around, just because something doesn't work once doesn't mean it's not got any value. Sometimes we do put things down and then pick them up at a later date. And then they become better because of the time and the experience that's accrued in between. So I think that's fascinating. And then again, it's just that it seems to be a bit of a theme in this conversation around almost like a confidence spiral, or we call it a self-efficacy spiral, where you've had these experiences where you've done something and it's been validated, which has then created more enthusiasm, more motivation, more confidence, and you just one opportunity opens the doors to lots of other opportunities. And then the last one I think in that story, which I think is really important, is, and I have to remind myself about this, it's probably a bit of Stephen Covey, isn't it, around don't fixate on external wins, like just because you're not going to get a promotion or a pay rise doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. There are all kinds of other benefits that come from stuff that aren't as tangible as that. I can hear my wife in the background. She's not here, so I can hear my wife ringing in my ears about, when is this book gonna, when are we gonna make any money out of this? I'm like, we're not, love. I think I'll get £1.12 per book, so it's going to be a long time. So yeah, you can't give up work. Hilarious. Well, that's brilliant, and thanks ever so much for telling us that story. It's super interesting. Let's get into our second launchpad then, shall we? So let's just get the screen back up, and we will we'll talk about this, because I think this is definitely related to what we were just talking about. In that, when I wrote this, again, I was thinking about how big an individual or a leader's kind of almost personal learning network is, or how far out they look for new things. So when I thought about this, it was kind of this idea that if we want to keep learning, then we need to keep progressively looking outwards as widely and diversely as possible. And I think at the time, I started tripping over some stuff from business. I think the actual example was someone had said to me quite flippantly, a friend who doesn't work in education, "Oh, have you done a force field analysis?" I thought, nope. What's that? He said, "Oh, yeah," and he explained it to me. And if you Google it, you'll find out. But it was about whether you should do a change or not do a change, and the forces pushing and resisting change and all that stuff. And of course, I was like, "Oh, this is really useful." And I thought, why am I not looking more into business for some leadership stuff? I mean, they've been doing it a lot longer than we have. And so I then started kicking around this idea that I wonder if we should reflect on how far as leaders we look. And so as if you're looking at this on screen, you'll be able to see it. But if you're not, then there's an image that talks about kind of, you could look within your team, you could look a bit further and think at a school level. You could look a bit further and look at kind of, if you're in a multi-academy trust, at that level. But then you could start looking even wider, so outside of your organization or outside of, formal organizations, into more educational stuff. So looking at some of the policy organizations and the training and, the research. And then, as I said, I wonder whether we should start looking more into other domains. Again, a friend of mine works in hospitality, and we had a fascinating conversation about some of the tiny little things that they do for their customers, and you see it on TV, don't you? Like, in these high-end hotels, they remember, like, how you like your pillows, what food, what you like in the mini bar and all that sort of stuff. And it's those tiny little tweaks that makes the customer feel valued anyway. And so I started kicking that around, and then thought, okay, well, what would we gain from that if we looked wider and wider? And it was about kind of, I think we've talked about looking beyond your current perspective. Anytime we can gain a different perspective, we open the opportunity for our learning to change or our understanding to change. Certainly something about strategies, and we've already spoke about the dangers of, lifting and shifting or dragging and dropping. But again, the force field analysis was a strategy I had no idea about. And now I almost use it every time someone comes to me with, a change. And I use it in my executive coaching as well, where people say, oh, I'm thinking of quitting my job or something. And I go, okay, well, let's do a quick force field analysis and we'll see whether the force is for or the force is against kind of balance. Something about empathy, I think, again, if we think about we're stuck in our own perspectives, some of us, myself included, sometimes find it hard to understand another person's position. So that's useful. And then, of course, learning. And I think you mentioned it at the beginning, this amazing kind of organic thing that I'm with Sam Gibbs and Tracy Goodyear, this idea that, networks of people, there's a collective wisdom in that if you've got enough safety for people to go, yeah, I didn't do that very well, you can start learning from other people's kind of failures and successes. And so that's really helpful. And so the last thing I thought I'd put in here, because everything that comes out that guy's mouth is gold, isn't it? A Dylan Williams quote about, nothing works everywhere and everything works somewhere. And so that's double-sided, isn't it? It's not to dismiss something because it hasn't worked somewhere else, because it might work for you, but also not to blindly take things that have worked somewhere and just drop it in. Anyway, why did this one resonate with you?
Yeah, and a lot of the stuff that I've thought about has tended to come from outside of education.
Right.
And, I'm kind of really interested in those kind of leadership books. So, No Silver Bullets was a bit of the idea of the aggregation of marginal gains.
Okay.
So the Clive Woodward winning autobiography, or David
Right.
Brailsford stuff for British cycling.
Mm.
Some of the kind of really, insightful books that I've read, if I think of Outliers and Bounce, Outliers by Gladwell, Bounce by Matthew Syed, that, 10,000 hours of practice rule, going back to my son and his bass guitar, just sitting there with tabs playing, bass guitar. And then, another big book for me was Mindsets by Carol Dweck. It's kind of gone out of fashion a little bit, but when I first read that idea of, closed and open mindsets seemed so pertinent to me as a teacher and as a leader. And the kind of learning from different environments. I recently read Rory Stewart's autobiography, and he talks about being a prisons minister and trying to transform, broken prisons. I found that really interesting. It's almost something that I daren't write about in an education sphere, because I don't want people to say, Paul's saying that schools are like prisons. No. But the kind of change process that they went through and working with leaders and giving leaders confidence, I found really interesting. And that Dylan Williams quote is brilliant, isn't it? I think is there a sentence before it that's something like, people ask me what works in school improvement, and I say, and I use that in virtually every presentation that I do. I always put that in there. So we need to make sure we're not on the same speaking bill, Chris, because if we kind of, otherwise we'll see the quote twice, won't we? Or we've got to make sure whoever's before the other,
Paul said.
Yeah, takes it out if they're second, aren't they? But yeah, and I do think that, whilst I think it's really important to read education books, I think it's equally important to read non-education books, and vice versa. Head Teacher Chat had put out a blog of their favourite educational leadership books, and somebody had kind of put on the bottom of that, I prefer leadership books outside of education, and listed some. And that's brilliant. But I think it's reading both of them together. I think if you just read one or just listen to one on its own, if I think of my podcasts, so, podcasts that I listen to at the moment, so I'm always looking for new ones. So I've been kind of working my way through all of yours recently, often listen to Shane Leaning. So that's my education section. Frank and Stan I listen to regularly. But then I love transferring that against The Rest is Politics, or Leading by Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart, or The Rest is Politics US, or those kind of things, to get that balance between, I don't want to become so institutionalized that I only see things through an educational lens, but also if I only listen or read of stuff in the world of business or sport, I'm kind of not seeing where people are transferring that and making it work in our sector. So yeah, I do think having that wide gaze is really important. And I think that beautiful infographic, that arc that you've shown of kind of transferring it classroom, school, multi-academy trust, wider, wider domain, whether that's the health service, sports, etc., I think is really clever. So yeah, look outside, but drag it back to your current sector. Where I think it does go wrong a little bit is where somebody reads something outside, talks about it to their staff, but doesn't make the educational link. You have to do that graft in between of
Yeah.
connecting it up. Because just because your brain's connected it up doesn't mean the people you're working with have naturally
That's
connected it
so
as
true.
well.
Yeah. That last bit's so true, isn't it? And that I'm very guilty of that. I'll spend, you know, months thinking about something and then spit it out in a really eloquent, succinct way and assume that people can then gain the same depth of understanding that I had. Yeah, again, there's lots wrapped up in there, and I think you said it perfectly at the end. Um, about kind of looking outside, but having to do some of the graft. And I guess the call to action or the challenge for leaders listening to this is to have a think about how far their gaze is at the moment and whether or not there's a layer that they could push into to improve all those things that we talked about. Brilliant. Okie dokie. So let's get on to the last bit of today. So we're going to be talking about your final fast friends question. And so I just lost me little me note with it on. Do you remember the last question?
So it's the what personal quality would you like
Yes.
to
Tell us a bit
develop?
about the personal quality bit that you want to improve.
So I'm going to be quite vulnerable here, and people
Go on.
might be surprised from maybe what I've said earlier in the conversation. The personal quality I would most like to develop is my own resilience. I
Okay.
think people will just assume that somebody who's written books, somebody who does conference sessions, somebody who's moved between jobs is a very resilient person. And I am to a certain extent, but also I find that incredibly hard.
Yeah.
Um, Sam spoke on one of your, was that the first or second
Yeah.
podcast?
First one. Yeah.
She talked about the idea of dealing with high challenge is easier if you're in a place of low psychological threat or a place of high psychological safety, whatever way around it is. I'm very conscious that a lot of colleagues that I work with are similar to me, that when we're under high challenge, we don't see the psychological safety. We just always see it as psychological threat.
Right.
And people talk a lot about, the way they express things or no, but I'm looking after you at the same time, I'm challenging you, but not everybody sees it like that.
Yeah.
And I find it I've always found it quite hard to deal with, even going back to being a child and playing, kind of sport at a decent level. I struggled with the challenge because it impacted on me quite a lot. So that's the thing that I would love to develop further. I would like to be more resilient. I would like to be able to cope with those high challenge conversations and believe that I was in a place of, high psychological safety. But I
Yeah.
find that really hard to do. But at the same time, I think that helps me as a leader
Okay.
because I every conversation I have, I'm thinking, but how is this person receiving this? How are
Yes.
they feeling? And again, going back to the start of the conversation, I will always be haunted by the Ian Curtis story, and that kind of, that person, didn't have that high psychological safety, and
No.
obviously didn't, wouldn't it be amazing if he'd had more resilience or been able
Yeah.
somebody to help him with that? So yeah, so that's my personal quality. I wish I could develop further, and at the age I am, I don't know if I'll develop it much further, and I'm also kind of this, to me, I've got this little theory as well that the more hard battles you've fought, the harder it is. So if we kind of go to the world of boxing, those people who fought the 15-round fights, it catches up with them if over time.
Yeah.
Whereas maybe the people who fought the quick fights, whether they won or lost, has had less physical impact on them. I think if
Yeah.
you faced a lot of challenge, does that kind of impact on your resilience over time? If you feel as though you've constantly been battling and fighting and trying to work, graft and work, which many teachers do, many
Yeah. Yeah.
leaders do, does that actually impact on their resilience? I don't know. I feel as though I'm on the psychologist chair there, Chris.
I love that, yeah, and that's a fascinating because it's almost counterintuitive, because you'd think that you would say the more challenge you experience, the more resilient you get. But actually, maybe it is the other way around, and who knows? But that's fascinating. I mean, I was really interested a while back reading about how self-regulation is an exhaustible resource. This idea that, the more decisions we have to make in a day, we progressively get just tired. And we make worse and worse decisions as the day goes on. If we've had a day where we haven't had to make lots of decisions early on, suddenly we're much better. And I thought that was fascinating. And maybe that's the same thing. Maybe, we just run out of resilience because we've used it all up. Yeah, wow. That is tricky. Have you got a sense of, like, have you thought about where this might have come from? Why you haven't got as much resilience as you like?
I think it's that kind of thing of, I don't know, maybe constantly trying to prove yourself, or constantly striving and trying. Maybe things. People perceive that things come easily to you, but they don't see the time it's taken you, do they? Or the kind of struggle, or the amount of stuff that's going on in your head, and that kind of thing. And I was one really on in my leadership career. This quite experienced female teacher came up to me and said, I want to be like you. And I was like,
Okay.
I'm 30 and you're 50 and you're an amazing teacher and I'm just playing at this. And I said, well, I just don't understand what you mean, Alison. And she said, but you're always so calm.
Right.
You just seem like a swan. You just move around this school just calmly. And I just wanted to say, I'm paddling like hell
You've
underneath.
no
It's
idea,
just you can't see. But I didn't want to do that, so I just kind of said, "Oh, that's really kind of you.
Yeah.
Thank you for saying that. That's made my day." I did an executive headship in a school in Lincoln for a while, for a term that behaviour had broken down. It was really tough. And I just did a term of trying to do some turnaround and calm it down. And a few of the teaching assistants, when I kind of stopped that kind of placement, said to me, "We just love you being here because it's so calm. When you're
Right.
here, you're so calm." And we hear the clip of your shoes across the kind of parquet floors or the tiled floors, and it actually makes us feel calm. And I was thinking, I did not feel calm during that at all. I was trying so hard to be Mr. Calm, whereas when I was thinking this school was on a knife edge and it could go at any point. And all I'm trying to do is the power of calmness, the power of just trying to manage a few high needs pupils and just hoping that will ripple through to experienced staff, but we're just a bit tired, I suppose, at that stage. So yeah, I don't know. It is that kind of thing, isn't it? We might look calm and polished or whatever on the surface, but it's what's underneath people don't see, do they?
Yeah. Well, I think that's, again, a key takeaway for us as leaders, not only for ourselves, but also looking to our staff and realizing that, what we see on the surface is not the whole story. And actually going back to what we talked about at the beginning, this idea that, there's a lot of personal things that go into performance as well as environment. So just because you're getting the environment right as a leader, that's not the whole equation. We got to look after the person as well, and also creating, situations where, and say, psychological safety, where people can put their hand up and say, yeah, I'm really paddling hard at the moment. I could do with a bit of support. And fascinating. Well, I have absolutely loved this. And again, tell us a bit about how people can connect with you on the socials or with the books.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, so kind of like all your guests, still on Twitter or still on X at PK Ainsworth, Blue Sky at PK Ainsworth, LinkedIn, Paul K Ainsworth, and the two books, the No Silver Bullets books, Day In, Day Out School Improvement and Heart and Soul and School Improvement. They're available from that big South American river that we kind of use regularly. And kind of really interested in kind of people reaching out, and if they pick up the books and read it, and there's anything in there that speaks to them or anything that seems a bit out of date, just really interested in people's opinions to kind of shape the next steps, so as to speak.
Love it. Well, as always, if you've enjoyed this and you want to kind of connect with the Launchpad stuff, then get in contact with me, get the book. And we'll see you at the next one. Thanks very much.